In a world where insanity reigns supreme and safety pin manufacturers are running out of metal for the diapers of the leftists, it's comforting to know an ancient, fat, long-haired, bearded reprobate has your mind in mind. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, broadcasting behind enemy lines in occupied California. And despite every attempt by the SHR Media Network to revoke his shameless contract, we return to the bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon.
You're listening to Late Night Radio on the SHR Media Network. Caution, there will be mature themes explored and potentially adult language used. If conservatarian words, phrases, certain concepts, or rhetoric offends you, tune out now.
Uh-oh, guess what day it is? Guess what day it is? Huh? Anybody? Julie, hey, guess what day it is? Oh, come on, I know you can hear me. Mike. What day is it, Mike?
Magnificent bastard, I read your book!
I drink your milkshake.
How dare you?
I call that bold talk for a one-eyed fat man.
Fill your hand, you son of a bitch! Of course you realize this means war.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome. It is Tuesday, rainy Tuesday in Sacramento. It's March 9th, the year of our Lord 2021. Welcome. Thank you for being here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to BZ's Berserk Bobcat Saloon radio show, where I'm broadcasting behind enemy lines in occupied California, always spell it with a K, a mere 2 miles east of the locus of evil on the entire left coast, the Bill Mill, the belly of the beast in downtown Sacramento, the Capitol building at 10th and L Streets, and at the end of the show, when I exit the plush, resplendent, sumptuous, and palatial SHR Media studios, I'll be smelling the odoriferous stench of sulfur, brimstone, and evil emanating from downtown Sacramento. Be forewarned. What you're about to hear for the next 2 hours consists of my opinion and no one else's. So the Saloon is still serving stiff drinks, facts, history, logic, rationality, proportion, context, tradition, intent, and common sense out the front and back doors, depending on the fear porn quotient. And also remember, we don't water our drinks, just like we don't water our conversation, politics, religion, crime culture, economics, race, sex, science, law. We talk about it all right here at the Saloon, where the speech is free, but the booze is not. This is 2021, and I'm done with bipartisanship and compromise. And also understand, I am done with the Republican Party. This is the new age of modern political warfare, gaslighting, lies, massive hypocrisy, half-truths, threats, and all on the part of Democrats, leftists, anarchists, aided and abetted by their propaganda organs, the American media maggots. They have all declared we are on an open war footing against you, normal people of the United States of America. 2021 is going to be the year of retribution, revenge, and punishment of conservatives by Democrats. So let there be no mistake. I love my country. That's why I'm here, and that's why you're here. So thanks for being here. Tonight I have this is going to be very interesting to see how this goes. So let me change the view here. I have a gentleman in the studio that I literally have not seen for probably 15 years, maybe even 20 years. Would that be about right? About maybe 20 years? Because you retired in 1995. 95. Okay. So this will be interesting. This is folks. This is Larry Laird, and it's an honor to talk to him. One of my law enforcement training officers from the 1970s. That's how far back we go. When I was a reserve for the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department, reserves officers there were volunteers who worked for free, generally in hopes of getting, generally but not always, of getting a full-time gig on the department. So we worked for free, hoping that, by showing whatever it was that we had to the various personnel that we worked with, that we'd get hired. Well, back then it was common for reserve officers to partner up with full-time deputies in patrol. And so that's how I came to work with my guest tonight, retired Deputy Larry Laird. So good evening to you, sir.
Great to be here.
Before we get going, I want to give condolences on the passing of your mom. That was very sad to hear. My mom passed in 2002, and then my dad passed in 2009. So my condolences to you, sir, for that.
Thank you. The main thing about that is I promised her years ago I wouldn't put her in a nursing home because when they were growing up, nursing homes were really bad.
Oh, yeah.
So I made the promise, and boy, did I pay for it. She lived until June of last year, and she died at my house. But the last 2 to 3 years, she was losing her mind. And,
she had Alzheimer's?
Yeah, and you do not want to know how bad that really is, because it is bad. One day I'm her husband, one day I'm her brother, one day I'm this or that. But to see someone that you grew up known as your mom fail like that, it is hard.
Well, I'd submit that, there was a deputy on the department, I don't know if you knew him, Mike Jenkins, who passed away from Alzheimer's, but he acquired it, I think, possibly during his time here. He was in his 50s. I hope I'm getting this right. And not long after his retirement, he passed away. I did not know that people got dementia or Alzheimer's so young. But it's one of those things where you watch somebody. I think it's every bit as hard on the person watching the victim as it is on the victim themselves. The victims, because you knew that person when they were at their peak, their strongest, so to speak. And then you have to watch
the demise,
them slowly go away, which is why, honestly, Reagan lasted quite a long time. Reagan is why I became a Republican back in 1990 or 80, because up until then I was a registered Democrat.
Oh no!
I worked for who was that dude? I worked for his campaign in 1972. I can't even think of his name now. Not Mondale. Anyway, it doesn't make any difference. That's how screwed up I was. So, and then when I started getting various jobs, and I was watching the major chunks being taken out of my paycheck, things changed. Funny how that works. Most of my time working as a reserve deputy was in the South area, in patrol. And I'm going to ask for a little help with this. Now, I mentioned the show in the SSD retired page, the new SSD retired page. So there might be some people who are listening from the department, as well as everybody else that I get. So to the people that are not familiar with the Sacramento Sheriff's Department, I'm going to mention a bunch of names right now. But these are the people that were important to me and you In the 70s, the mid-70s, when I came onto the department as a reserve, my first training officer was Hugh McGraw. And boy, do I have stories about Hugh. And anybody that knows him knew that there are lots of stories about him. And then I was in the South area. You were in the South area, South Sacramento area. So we had Jimmy Basden and Ed Denton, who were in Beats 15, and collectively the two of them were called the Midgets. You, Larry Laird, then there was Larry, you were 16, Paul 1.
15, Edward.
15, Edward? Okay, all right. Then there was Larry James. I worked with Larry James, Nate Martin, Joanne Briggs when she was down south, and Arnold Van Kirk, who was known as Ziff, because Arnold was the pig on Green Acres, and then he was Arnold Ziffel, so Arnold became Ziff. And I'm thinking, did I miss anybody that was down south?
No.
I got most of the major characters, I think.
I know when I came on as 15 Edward 2, or 15 Edward, Denny, what did he say his name was?
Denny?
No, Ed Denton.
Oh, Ed Denton, right.
He was the main guy. I was his associate.
Okay.
And Bobby Long was leaving the detail, and that's when we had the stuffed monkey.
Bobby, that's another thing that I had, and a lot of the guys down south had stuffed animals in our cars. Ed Denton had Rufus in his car. Right. Now, Rufus was a sock monkey.
Right.
That's back when you made sock monkeys. And then, let's see, Bob Long had Ruby. That was his sock monkey.
Right.
And then I got a stuffed animal, Flipper, because I used to be able to make the sound of a dolphin. And let's see, our sergeants, I came up with these guys, and maybe you remember some more. Our sergeants down south were John Bowman.
One of the best.
Bob Buckman, John Bowman. Quick story about John Bowman. It may have been Eddie who told me this, because I first rode with some other people before I started working with you as a reserve, but I can distinctly remember Hugh McGraw and Eddie Denton told me back then. And folks, when we started, we had a microphone, and we had a radio, and we didn't have an MCT. We didn't have any of the in-car computer stuff. None of it existed back then. So you had to remember where all of your fellow deputies were on calls.
Right.
Or you wrote it down. Here's where their address was. If they call for code 3 cover, you got to know where they are to respond. And I can distinctly remember Eddie Denton and Hugh McGraw telling me, always cover your sergeant. If your sergeant makes a vehicle stop, you go right there until you hear a code 4. Cover your sergeant, and they'll take care of you. You take care of them, and they will take care of you.
Right.
And let's see, I mentioned Bob Buckman.
I don't remember Bob Buckman that much.
Okay. Am I missing another sergeant?
See, I wasn't there that long. I was only in patrol maybe about 4 or 5 years before I went to the aero detail.
Okay.
So.
And I remember the lieutenant for a time was Lee Harms.
Yeah.
And I think the only reason I remember Bob Buckman was because he would demand. No, it wasn't Bob Buckman. Somebody, maybe you can remember. Somebody demanded. We used to have to wear hats when we got out of our cars. We had to wear our hats, and anytime we were caught without a hat on, we had to pay a quarter.
Well, I know when we were working down, like you said, you had to put the hats on, but most of the sergeants didn't even come south. They stayed in Cordova. They left us alone.
Oh, okay.
So
all right, maybe that's why I don't remember too many sergeants.
John Bowman was good. I've had a big gunfight one night, and I was just swamped on reports and talking to people. He jumped in and started writing paper for me, and that's the thing I remember about him is he rolled up his sleeves and just jumped right in.
And that's the mark of a good supervisor. Yep. You take care of the troops, and they will take care of you.
That's right.
Before we hit this area, though, because we're going to come back to the Sacramento Sheriff's Department, I want to go back a little bit. At the time when I was working with you, because you were not a training officer of me, but you were a full-time deputy, so you were the boss of the car. And then I would assist in whatever fashion reserves would assist with.
Did I ever let you drive?
Yes, you did, as a matter of fact. Because I can remember you said, I don't think I let you drive. But you did. You did let me drive. I do remember that.
I remember along the TOs. I mean, Jimmy Smoke was my TO one month. We weren't real busy that month, didn't get too many reports, but I wrote a report, and it wasn't up to snuff. And we were at the old Sheriff's Department down in the basement, in the shift, writing reports. Jim Hall, Sergeant Jim Hall, was a report writer at the academy. Well, Smoke went in and gave him my report. He come back out and just ripped me a new asshole. Asked me what kind of grade I got on reports, and I said a B+. But the thing is, you write the reports as the TO tells you to write them. So he talks to the people, then he tells you, and then you write the report, and so it's all lost in the lingo because you're trying to please all of them, and you can't do it. So the next night, Jim Smoke says, I'm having you stay with me for another month. And I thought, oh, shit. I said, I'm screwed. Because I knew they were going to try and wash me out. But that night we had it out in the car. I said, we come on at nighttime. We carry your damn bags out to the car and all the shotgun. We come back, pick you up at the back door. We sit in the passenger seat while you drive at the busy part of the shift. And then at the morning part of the shift, when I get to drive, there's nothing to do. And I'm told not to make a vehicle stop. I said, well, how am I supposed to learn anything? And after I told him that, I thought I had to get it out.
Yeah. Jim
and I were the best of friends after that. He let me drive. He taught me. And he was one of the best TOs I ever had.
There were a lot of things. I never worked with or around Jimmy Smoke, but I didn't meet anybody who didn't say absolutely stellar things about him on the department.
Another one we lost real young.
Yes, I don't remember how he passed.
I don't either now, but I know it was way too soon.
So before we go into the Sheriff's Department, and we'll come back to this a little bit, at the time, I had no idea that you had served in Vietnam. I had no idea of the things that you'd done before you came to the department. Well, and the other thing was I was a reserve, and you probably didn't talk about that with anybody. The job was take the calls, handle the calls, go into watch, take care of what needs to be taken care of. So I gave you a copy before we started the show of a book called Chicken Hawk by an author named Robert Mason. And his claim to fame was he learned to fly Hueys in Vietnam for the U.S. Army. And the U.S. Army had the bulk of helicopters in Vietnam. And I almost made a really serious error tonight. You're smiling. And I thought, maybe I ought to go to Larry's Facebook page and see if there's maybe something there in Larry's Facebook page that I ought to know before tonight. And then I saw, USMC, and I thought, oh, Jesus, I was just going to say Larry flew for the Army. Don't ever make that mistake.
Not around a Marine Corps, man.
Oh, God. And then you flew with VMO-3, and then we'll get into that. So you were flying in Vietnam, in Hueys, as a crew chief on a gunship for the Marines, not the Army.
Correct.
Which was a little unusual because the bulk of the people flying Hueys then were Army guys. So we'll get into that also in a little bit. Did you grow up in Sacramento?
Born and raised here my whole life.
Okay. All righty. And so when you were younger, did you have an interest in flying or helicopters or anything like that?
I didn't even know anything about helicopters. Never even heard of a helicopter until the Vietnam War started up. And you might see one on TV once in a while. And never even thought about being a crew on one. And when I was growing up in the 60s, John Kennedy was assassinated, and then before that we had the Cuban crisis.
Right, 62.
And when I graduated, I was working as a clerk at a grocery store, and I went in the Marine Corps. Didn't tell my parents to come home, said I joined up. Well, my dad quit high school and joined World War II. But
okay.
I don't know, I just was bored, and I went down. Had I checked the Army, I probably would have went there because they would have taught me how to fly the damn thing instead of sitting in the back shooting a gun. So that's how I got into it. But I never even knew what a helicopter was.
Okay, so you volunteered. You weren't drafted. Why the Marines instead of the Army?
Wanted to be a man.
Okay. Did you have anybody in your family that had served in the military like your dad? He was in the Marines?
No, he was in the Navy.
He was in the Navy. Okay. So the Marines they were where you wanted to go.
Coming out of high school, I was pretty athletic. I didn't play any sports because I worked. And it was easy to become a Marine. I mean, I had to go through their bullshit down there, but the PT and stuff didn't bother me all that much.
Okay.
So, but they make men of you. They really do.
And I'll also say that, because I've had a ton of people on the show, many of them in the military, including there's a former Marine. No, I'm sorry. No, that's a mistake right there. There are no former Marines. Mm-hmm. And I was going to make that point because Matthew Betley, who was an author that I had on here, I said that. Former Marine. I was corrected rapidly about that. But there is essentially no prouder force that I've ever come across than anybody that served in the Marines.
When I signed up for the Marine Corps, I met 3 other guys that were going to City College then, and they all knew each other. And when we went down to Frisco to get our physical, I met them. So there was 4 of us from Sacramento. We all went to boot camp together. We were all in aviation at Memphis, Tennessee together. We all came back to the West Coast. 2 of us went to Camp Pendleton and 2 went to El Toro.
Okay.
And all 4 of us went over to Vietnam together in different units. 2 of us were up north in Hue with VMO-3. The other 2 were at Da Nang. And we all came home together. None of us got hurt. And that's where we are today. And I just talked to one the other day. We still talk. I mean, we're just as close now as we ever were.
When my understand, obviously I think I'm wrong, but I thought Marines went to Parris Island. You did not go to Parris Island?
No, San Diego.
San Diego.
MCRD.
Okay.
And then the other one is back east, Camp Lejeune.
Okay. All righty. So how is it that now an MOS for people who are not in the military is a military military occupational specialty, MOS. And yours became crew chief. Now, how? No?
No.
Okay.
My MOS basically was a jet engine mechanic.
Oh, okay.
And the Hueys had jet engines, so that's where I got assigned.
Okay.
Well, actually, when I got to Camp Pendleton, I volunteered to go the next detachment to go into Vietnam. So they brought in all the new pilots. We were flying together, working and learning about the helicopter because these were still brand new. And these pilots, they knew nothing, just like we didn't know anything. So we all learned together, and we all went over together. There was 2 detachments. We sent an early detachment of 10 helicopters over on ship. Then the rest of us left in March of 67 and met up with them in Hue, which is south of the DMZ by about 50 miles or so. And that's where we were stationed.
So you went into the Marines. You stayed here in California, and that's where you trained as well. Every Marine is a rifleman. But how did you get now into Marine aviation?
Actually, when I signed up, I said I want to go into aviation, and you had to have on your entry exam, you had to have such a score high enough to get into it. They just didn't take everybody. So that's how I got in, and that's when I met the other three guys. They the same way. So you had
a kind of a mechanics background, because to be, to work on jet engines, I'm sure you had to have some kind of a mechanical background.
Well, that's when we went to Memphis. They taught us all that. Okay. I mean, they basically showed you what hand tools you need, and talked about the rotor heads, the engine, all the parts of it, how it works. And when we graduated from there, I was high enough that I got my choice of duty station, and that's when I went back to Camp Pendleton and joined VMO-3.
Okay. And VMO-3 is what, for the people that are unfamiliar with the military?
VMO-3, back then, we had it's a Marine Observation Group.
Okay.
And they actually were just learning like we were. They'd put guns and rockets on these things, and when I was over there, they put some kind of a gas pod on this thing that we tried to use, and we had a big searchlight that took up the whole back end of the helicopter, and he would fly low, and the other two ships above would come in when he took fire, and we'd roll in and squelch the fire. And they had something called a sniffer, too. They had a big machine in the back. They stuck a tube out the front of the pilot's bubble, and they could pick up scent. He flew tree level, picking up scents, and he could tell where a large group of people were because of the smell. Fish.
Really?
Yeah.
Now,
and then
that's unique.
Two top ships would roll in if they took cover or fire.
So this was... The Huey helicopter was brand new at the time for the Army, just like it was for the Marines. My understanding is that of all the aircraft airframes manufactured by the United States, they made more of that than any other airframe, fixed wing or not.
Right.
There were more Hueys than anything else.
And then they had different models because Marine Corps, they always get the crummy shit. So ours was just a flat back seat. So there was a gunner on one side and a crew chief on the other, and the two pilots up front. Now the Army, they came in and they used theirs as troop haulers too. So they had a longer ship. The door gunner sat back in like a hole away from the door, but at the door, but away from the troops. The troops would get in the middle, and it was a lot longer. And that's the way they deployed their men, was like that. They all went in Hueys.
So, the U.S. Army had its primary helicopter flight school at Fort Walters, Texas, and so for training after you became a mechanic, then where did you go for training as crew chief? Was it still in California?
Well, it was at the same time as we were learning the ship and stuff. We weren't really crew chiefs then. We were just learning how to fly, be a crew. And they taught us how to do the maintenance. The crew chief is in charge of the ship.
Right.
He goes out, he pre-flights it, he greases the head, he makes sure everything's working all right, and stuff like that. And in Vietnam, you become a crew chief. And that's your ship. You take care of it. You do everything with it. You go where it goes. And that's where I learned to be a crew chief, was over there. Because the first day I was there, he said, "You want to fly?" I said, "Yes, sir." I'm in line.
Oh, yeah.
My first day of flying, we flew medevac. We had what I call medevac is we had an old radial engine, CH-34. And a big radial engine sets out in front. The pilot sat way up on top.
Oh, those are the big Sikorskis that you see in a lot of in Korea. Weren't those used a lot in Korea? They're kind of tall.
Somewhat, because the pilot sat way up high.
Yeah, okay, that's the one I'm thinking of.
And what would happen is they would call for a medevac. Somebody was shot or whatever. The 34 would go out, and we would run guns with it in case they took fire and stuff. So they would land in the zone, and we'd fly on both sides of it, protecting it while they were in the zone. And then they'd fly out. My first day, I got 13 missions on my first day of flying.
Holy crap.
20 missions equals air medal in the Marine Corps. I ended up with 24 air medals.
24 air medals.
Right. I loved it.
Okay. Folks, we're going to take a break. I'm talking to Larry Laird. I worked for and with Larry back around 1975, 1976 for the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department. We're going to take a break, and I'll be right back after this, okay?
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Hey, are you guys listening? This is Shannon from Right Way with Shannon and Mike in the AM on SHR Media. I know you've been wondering where we are and what's been going on. Well, folks, that's right. We're back. So please join us 7 to 9 a.m. Monday through Thursday on SHR Media, on Spreaker, iHeartRadio, and Spotify, and Facebook Live at 11 a.m. on Right Way with Shannon and Mike in the AM at Facebook. You don't want to miss a minute. We've got lots of guests, lots of segments, and lots of interesting things. And let's face it, there's nowhere for you to go, so you might as well tune in. Again, Right Way with Shannon and Mike in the AM. We're back live on the air on SHR Media, 7 to 9 a.m. Monday through Thursday, audio and Facebook Live, audio and video. Yes, we are going to do video. Facebook Live, Right Way with Shannon and Mike in the AM. Hope to see you soon.
Unleashed Jeremy Hansen, the most explosive pro-American podcast on the planet. Pro-MAGA, pro-Trump, pro-conservative. Come join the resistance. Fight for what really matters in America. 5 p.m. Central on UJHLive.com, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Pandora, or MAGAbook.com. Come join the resistance and fight for America. Unleashed Jeremy Hansen.
Do you value yourself, your family, your friends? Want to know more about how to survive, thrive, and stay alive in these dynamic times? Listen to Around the Campfire with Kate, Thursday nights and Sunday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Central, only on PSN TV. That's Around the Campfire with Kate. News that nobody in the MSM wants to report. Remember, train hard, train smart to survive, thrive, and stay alive.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome back. I'm BZ. With me tonight is Larry Laird. He's a Vietnam veteran. In the first half hour, we were talking about Larry's service in the Sacramento Sheriff's Department, which is where I met him, and also his service as a crew chief. We were talking about that just before the break in Vietnam. So, Larry Laird, when did you actually go? You volunteered for the Marines. You got your basic training. You decided that you were going to be a mechanic, a turbine mechanic, jet engine mechanic. Then you transitioned over into, well, did the Marines, it was so early then, did the Marines actually have a label of crew chief for their helicopters yet?
No, not really. They a crew chief you did designated a crew chief until you got to Vietnam. Other than that, you're just a crew. And we were still learning how to work on them, what to do, and all this stuff. We read books and take things apart, put them back together. And they were having, when I got to Camp Pendleton, they were having a crew that was going to go over to Vietnam, and I volunteered right away. I didn't get the first increment, but I was in the second increment. They went there in March.
And the goal with that was, I should have asked this before, was your ultimate goal to, I want to fly helicopters?
If I'd have been smart, excuse me, Marine buddies, I would have went to the Army and checked out first, because I would have been a pilot there, where I'm only a crew member here. But being a man, Marine Corps builds men, and I volunteered. I went over there, and I learned the ropes just as fast as I could. Like I said, the first day that I flew, 13 missions.
Was there a pipeline from, say, being a crew member or a crew chief, the later designation? Did the Marines have any kind of a pipeline from, okay, you're a member of the crew, hey, do you want to be a pilot? Did they have anything going on like that?
No.
They were just hiring pilots.
Well, those
or
were
people
college,
to train.
Yeah, those were college educated.
Okay.
All of our guys most of our pilots were older gentlemen, and then the young ones, the lieutenants, were fresh out of flight school. They knew nothing. And even the older guys, with a helicopter being new like it was, they didn't have that many hours in it. So we all learned together. And you didn't become a crew chief. You became a gunner.
Okay.
And the first increment went over, you learned from them, because they'd been there for about 3 or 4 months before we got there. So they sort of showed us the ropes. Once you become a gunner, then you move over to being a crew chief if you want to.
Was that something that a lot of people aspired to become a crew chief?
50-50.
Because you'd have to have some kind of a mechanical aptitude, I would guess, for that.
Most of the guys that worked in, like, say, the ordnance that would load the machine, the bullets and stuff underneath our seats, and the rockets in the rocket pod, they would fly as gunners. And then the crew chief took care of the aircraft. And when the pilots come out, they would ask you, have you done this, you done that? And they'd walk around with you, and they'd ask you a question, but they didn't know much about it either. So there's like, kick the tires and get in, let's go. And with all the equipment being fairly new, we didn't have that many problems.
Number one, it must have been thrilling to be on the leading edge of something entirely new like that, like an aviation, a helicopter. Well, let me ask you this, Larry Laird, was there such a thing as a helicopter aviation unit before you got there?
Well, they had the older ones, like you see on MASH.
Right, the Bell 47s.
That's what started helicopters. And then in Korea, they had the 34s, which is the radial engine.
Right.
And then once the Vietnam War started up back in the 60s, they started building this thing, the Hueys, and put jet engines on them. And then they just made millions of them.
Like I said, that was one of the biggest mass-produced airframes that I could think of.
What really pissed me off is when the Vietnamese, after the war was over, and the Vietnamese flew the Hueys out to the ships, and they were pushing these Hueys over into the ocean.
I remember seeing video of that.
Yeah.
They're pushing them off the decks of aircraft
Get
carriers.
More people.
God. Wouldn't you... Well, I'll save this question for later, because we still have a little time. I wanted to play this and see if this kind of rings a bell for you. There comes the sound that everybody recognizes as a Huey. The thing that I always found amazing about the Huey is you could hear those things from a long way away. They were so... Nothing makes a sound like a Huey on takeoff or just flying. They were, and they make a distinct sound as they approach, and they make a completely different sound as they pass. So one of the first things that I always wondered was how everybody and their brother must have heard you coming from miles away, or how could they not?
Well, they could. But what we used to do is the older pilots would fly at 1,500 feet. So they couldn't hurt us up there.
Okay.
I mean, they'd shoot at us, and every once in a while they might hit something. The young guys, right at treetop level, by the time they hear us, we're gone. So,
okay.
I mean, we were right at treetop level.
Okay. I can remember, and you can probably confirm this for me, because when he told me, and it was CW who told me this right after my trench ride over the American River, which still was cool as hell. One of the best times I ever had. Anyway, CW said in Hueys, because of the nature of the blades, if they had to, they would create LZs by chopping the vegetation with the tips of their blades. And I thought, that's insane. That's nuts.
Well, what he's talking about is making an LZ is the elephant grass. And it was 6-8 feet in the air. And a lot of times they would go down the elephant grass. That would cut it. But you're not going to cut a tree with the blade.
Okay, because I was thinking, God, how would you... well, that basically that left me.
Yeah.
That left me breathless. When did you first go to Vietnam? Do you remember what year that was?
1967. I was 67. I came back in June of 68. I was there during the Tet Offensive.
Oh. Okay. Well, then that would account for all the missions that you were on.
I flew secret missions into Laos. We didn't take anything except our dog tags and what is called a blood chit. It has it's a piece of cloth, has an American flag on top, and has about 15, 20 different languages. Say, if you get us back to safety, we'll give you so much money. And we were say if we ever got caught, we were just lost. That's all we were telling. And we never wore insignias. Pilots didn't, crew members, so they didn't know who was doing what.
Okay. I know it's been a couple of years. Is there anything that you can say about some of those missions?
Well,
or
they were highly when we were. Well, the pilots would go into the briefing in the command bunker, and what we would hear is we knew where anti-aircraft was going to be. We knew where the 50 calibers were going to be. We knew where the machine guns were going to be. On one mission, we're going to go over and the ARVNs, which is the South Vietnamese Army, they flew the 34s. And the pilots in those things, they'd get in and say, let's go, and pop up, and they'd take off. And we'd sort of just follow wherever they were going. And we knew where they were going. And they were going to drop troops in. They were going to go up and blow up this ammo dump, and they were going to climb the hill, and they were going to go back and pick them off the hill and bring them back. That's one mission.
Okay.
secret stuff like that. And then the whole time we were there, the president claimed that we weren't there. So nobody, you know.
Of course.
Yeah, we didn't write home about it or anything. So
one of the things I printed this out, and one of the other reasons that I wanted to have you here tonight is there's, I don't know, 9 or 10 pages of Vietnam War statistics. And I printed this out for tonight, and maybe I'll read some, maybe I won't. And you set me straight if I'm incorrect. Of all the wars in which we participated, or actions, you know, whatever euphemism the president at the time wanted to use, but of all the wars or actions, it seems to me that the soldiers and aviators of Vietnam basically got shit on the most by the American public. And it wasn't until, I'd go so far as to say decades later, that people began to recognize what a terrible position into which American soldiers had been placed. And they weren't allowed to run the war. It was micromanaged, essentially, from the Oval Office. And I can remember stories, and again, set me correct if this is wrong, of soldiers being spit on when they come back, when they came back from Vietnam.
I've had that happen. I mean, you go to the airport, and the first thing you do is you take your bag and you change clothes. But in the Marine Corps, you always had the haircut.
Yeah.
Even with a hat on, they knew who you were.
Yeah.
They'd call us baby killers and everything else. And, of course, that's back in the 60s, and everybody is free, peace, and love and all that crap going on. Everybody, to a man that was in our unit, wanted to fight a war. If they would have turned us loose, we would have had it done in a couple weeks. We had places, we had free kill zones. Anything that moved out there, we could kill. We had other things we'd get shot at and couldn't shoot back. Like we were coming back from Quezon one day, and this pilot, he's older guy, but he didn't take any shit. And a little saipan was sitting down in the river by way and shooting at us. So he called to get clearance to shoot the guy back. They said, no, that's friendly. And he turns his radio off, and he turned it back on, and it's like he's squelching it. He says, I can't hear you. He turned it off, and we blew the sucker out of the water.
It's funny you were mentioning that, because part of this big 10-page thing that I printed out, it's the Vietnam War and soldier statistics, and it set me straight on a lot of things that occurred during Vietnam. Now, you were mentioning that. One of the sections under this that I printed out says winning and losing. 82% of the veterans who saw heavy combat strongly believed the war was lost because of the lack of political will.
Yeah.
So that
we had no backing. Politicians can't run a war. You need the generals to run the war. Westmoreland did the best he could. I didn't agree with all the stuff he did, but that's how wars are run. They're run by the generals and underlings.
It also says nearly 75% of the public agreed it was a failure of political will, not of arms.
Yeah.
The other thing that I discovered, because there were so many negative movies and books that came out during and following Vietnam, that Vietnam veterans were dopers. And that was a theme amongst a lot of stuff. Drug usage and crime in this. There's no difference in drug usage between Vietnam veterans and non-Vietnam veterans of the same age group. That's from the VA. Vietnam veterans are less likely to be in prison. 85% of Vietnam veterans made successful transitions to civilian life. 97% of Vietnam veterans were honorably discharged. 91% of actual Vietnam War veterans and 90% of those who saw heavy combat are proud to have served their country. to listen to what people wrote about the war, you wouldn't think that this would be correct. 74% say they would serve again, even knowing the outcome.
That's true.
Which I think is a testimony to the people that fought.
We fought for each other.
Yes.
That's what we fought for. And there wasn't a man, like I said, if they told us to go to North Vietnam, we would all marched up there right the next day. But they wouldn't turn us loose.
I submit, and again, you correct me if I'm wrong, Larry Laird. It says now 87% of the public now holds Vietnam veterans in high esteem. But it wasn't true then.
No, it's a little too late. Because everybody wants to get on the bandwagon now and say, hey, we're sorry and we're all this. Well,
yeah. Imagine
the
that.
harm's already been done.
You were in Huey's for about a year?
Yes.
Roughly?
Yeah.
Okay.
A little over a year.
Number one, I wanted to get to be an observer in the sheriff's department. That just didn't work out. You and I talked about a whole bunch of junk that happened. However, being in combat, a lot of things are different than in a civilian side. If you had to think back, what would you say is, in terms of flying in a helicopter in Vietnam, in the war, was one of the coolest things that you got to do? Number one, you're flying, which has got to be way cool.
It is.
And is there anything that kind of steps out for you in terms of, I remember this to this day, and this was way cool?
I'll tell you what it was. It's the adrenaline rush. When you're sitting in that doorway and you're firing at the enemy down below, protecting a ship that's in the zone, picking up dead bodies or wounded, or even picking a recon team up to get them out of there, there's no greater thrill than that adrenaline rush you get from helping them. And they come back and, the recon guys come shake our hands. And they always knew. Our call sign was Scarface. They knew if Scarface was coming, they were in good hands. And we went from Way all the way up to the DMZ, from the coast all the way to Khe Sanh and into Laos and Cambodia. And there was nothing, I like I said, the adrenaline rush. When I came back and I went back to the grocery business, I made my way up to being almost assistant manager. I wasn't happy. There was something wrong. And my father-in-law at the time says, well, the sheriff's department has ride-alongs. Go on a ride-along. Maybe you'll like it, because he was on the city forces as lieutenant.
Okay.
And so I did, and I rode with Bob Kraft. And after that night, there was I couldn't get to the test soon enough. And it's that adrenaline rush, because when you hear that code 3, or you hear that pursuit, that adrenaline rush comes in. Even when I'm sitting at home today and that helicopter's flying over, I just wonder, or you hear a siren going off.
Sure.
You wonder what they got. What do they have? So.
Exactly. The thing that I distinctly remember, and this doesn't have anything directly to do with helicopters, we'll get back to that in a second, but for a time I was editor of, we had a magazine called The Deputy. And it was actually a very well-produced magazine. Nice, slick, good photographs, right, color, etc. And I wrote some articles and took a lot of photographs and whatnot, and then I was the editor for a while. We used to get in the association, back when the association was downtown, we would get a copy, and I'd read through these things, of the, what was it? Well, it was LAPD's magazine, The Thin Blue Line, which is where that phrase comes from. That magazine, The Thin Blue Line, from LAPD. And one of the first things that I noticed almost immediately is I'd go to the back of the magazine and I would see, pick a name, Ed Smith. And I'd see Ed Smith retired, blah, 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 blah. I'd get a magazine 3 or 4 months later, And I'd look at that, and I'd see Ed Smith passed away. What has kept you going? I mean, let me back this up a little bit. You've been in hellacious situations, things I had no idea that you had experienced when I was working with you, which is, again, another reason I wanted to talk to you tonight. So I had no idea what you'd been through. Zero. Obviously, I didn't go to Vietnam. I have a Vietnam story. Here's my Vietnam story. I signed up for selective service in 1968 because I was 18. So then I waited, and I waited a while. And then I thought my number was, I think I had a single-digit number, as a matter of fact. So I was figuring, okay, all right. There you go. Just, wave goodbye. And then nothing happened for a couple of months. And then I was in Ohio at the time. So then Dad was in the Air Force. I was an Air Force brat. So we moved back to Sacramento. And I went to college. Then I continued through college. Then life happened. And then every once in a while, I would go back and think, dude, 1968, I should have gone. I never got notified. Nothing ever happened.
They must have lost your paperwork.
Oh, okay. It's funny you should mention that, because then I did find out what happened. I think it was Chillicothe or another little town in Ohio, had a tornado go through it. All the selective service records for the entire state were in a building in that town that got ripped apart by the tornado, and I never went. I had no idea until later I started back researching this thing to find out. It wasn't 20 or 30 years later that I discovered what had happened. I fully expected to go. I didn't get anything, so I thought, okay, I'll go to college. Maybe they yank me out of college. Okay. Then I kept going and going. Then I got jobs and blah, blah. That is my Vietnam story. I fully expected to go.
You're lucky.
And I didn't. Because I'm sure I probably would have, with my wide range of experience, goose egg, I would have probably been carrying a rifle in someone's paddy somewhere.
Right.
When you were flying, Larry Laird, you talked about the most exciting aspect of it. Was there an incident or maybe even a series of incidents that were just harrowing? Did you ever get shot down?
Not per se. We got a bullet hole in the blade, and we had a vibration. We had to land. And other than being shot down, no, not really. I mean, we went down for mechanical reasons or, something like that. But I've had the co-pilot in front of me shot. I've had the gunner on the other side shot. I've had the pilot, he's been shot. We even had a civilian from Okinawa was there to teach us how to use these gas pods. And it was a little plastic pod, and they're like D-cell batteries in it. Well, you had to fly at a certain height and a certain speed. And what you do, they break open that pod, and all these little batteries start spinning. And just before they hit the ground, the gas or whatever, they wouldn't tell us what was in it, but we had to wear gas masks, so it must have been bad.
Yeah.
On the way to do this, we had a civilian from Okinawa that was set between me and the gunner in the back seat. And pilot, somebody needed help somewhere, so he rolled off what we were doing, went to help these people out. We roll in, and up through the floorboard comes a bullet and hits the civilian in the arm and comes out his shoulder. The only four of us in there, he's the only one that got shot.
Yeah, the guy that doesn't fly customarily in your helicopter, and there he goes.
Yeah, he's a civilian. He shouldn't even have been there. And he gets shot. I don't talk about Vietnam because everybody wants to hear the blood and the guts and the glory and all that. And for years, I've hardly ever talked about it.
Then in that way, you're very similar to my dad, who flew B-17s for the 8th Air Force, and I've told this story any number of times. So there's my dad flying B-17s. He's actually a left-hand pilot. For the 8th, does his, at the time, I think he did 30 or 35, because it was kind of later on in the war. So the early dudes did 20, 25 missions, something like that. So he did a few more missions. Then comes back, and he comes back to Mather, which is where he met my mom in Sacramento. And they make him, after flying B-17s, I never got this. They make him an instructor pilot in B-25s. Hello? I never got that aspect. Folks, we're going to have to take a break. It's the top of the hour. It's 9 o'clock on the left coast. It's midnight on the east coast, where a lot of my listeners are. We're going to take a break. We're going to do this and be right back.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
It is he that is me, bringing perspective from across the sea. Join me, Jack Alexander, 4 days a week for the Jack Alexander Experiment podcast, as I take a unique outsider's look at the news and issues affecting life and liberty here in the USA. I'll show you what the mainstream media refuses to. Politics, border security, defense, healthcare, travel, nothing is off limits. Catch the Jack Alexander Experiment podcast each Monday to Thursday on Facebook, YouTube, and everywhere good podcasts can be found. Also, check out the website, www.jackalexanderexperiment.com.
It's your business diva here, Melanie Collette. I am inviting you to a front row seat as I discuss some of the most intriguing details of wealth and finance with today's movers and shakers in the world of business. Listen in and discover financial truths on a global, domestic, and household scale. Uncover topics that will impact your wallet today and in the future. Money Talk with Melanie airs Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. East, 2 p.m. West, right here on SHR Media and High Plains Pundit Talk Radio. You can't afford to miss it.
After 6 years covering terror and corruption, the Unpleasant Blind Guy is making a change. I'm Dave Milner. Join me on Spreaker and YouTube through SHR Media and on the Western Free Radio Network as I team up with Jeff Mitchell, host of the English Defense League radio show on blogtalkradio.com. Check show pages for airtimes. It's the Unpleasant Blind Guy.
On EBL Radio.
There's
no surrender, ever.
Because truth is not always pleasant.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
And we're back. I'm back. I'm talking to Larry Laird tonight. He's a Vietnam War veteran, served as a crew chief for the Marines on a Huey during Vietnam. And what I'd like to do now is transition from Vietnam, because you kind of already did this yourself, saying that you got through, you made Vietnam, you survived, you came back, and you had a little bit of an adrenaline dump, and working the grocery store gig didn't cut it for you. So you said you went into the sheriff's department. What year did you go through the academy in the sheriff's department? Do you remember?
We were the first academy to live in academy out at the old CHP on Meadowview.
Meadowview, okay.
It was 1973, February of 73.
Okay. Do you remember any of the people that went through with you in that academy?
Well, Larry James.
Oh, okay.
You know, I can't remember because City was there. There was a lot of older guys, too, that were being put through because they'd never been in the academy. We had Tom Myers, who works in fingerprinting. Why he was there, I don't know, but he had to go through the academy with us. Wernicke, he was another old guy from Fingerprint ID. He was through. I mean, then after our academy was, I think, was the girls' academy, where they had a bunch of all females almost. And I think there was 2 or 3 guys like John Blansett or somebody else like that was in with them.
Okay. So you graduated from the academy. What was your first assignment? Did you go into the jails? Or did you go right out to the street?
No, we went, we got assigned a training officer.
Okay.
We were supposed to be there 3 or 4 months, go through, 2 or 3 officers.
Right.
At the time, they were shorthanded, and Larry, James, and I stayed out another 6 months working a solo car together. Or not together, but in beats. So, but that put us 6 months behind coming back to patrol.
Oh.
It was fun while it lasted.
Oh. So there goes your seniority rotation back to patrol. Okay. So then after you pass training, you're there for 6 months. Then you go back to the jail for a while?
Went to the jail, went to RCCC. Used to, you go to RCCC, you stayed there for the whole 4 or 5 years, whatever it was, to work your way back through.
Yeah.
Luckily enough, when we were coming through, they were hiring right and left. So there was one guy, I forget his name, but he wrote up a format where if for a well-rounded officer, we shouldn't be just in RCCC. Should go to the main jail for so long, airport so long, courthouse so long, and he got that started. So with about a year left, I got taken out of there, and I went to the courthouse for a year, and then I went to the airport for about 2 or 3 weeks, and then back to patrol.
Okay. So when you were in patrol, did you go immediately just, boom, down south?
I didn't even get a choice.
Okay. Just like, okay, Larry, there you go. You're there.
You're a big guy. We're going to put you down in Oak Park. I said, oh, okay. Where's that?
All right.
I grew up north.
Okay.
So, I knew where Oak Park was, but Beat 15 is the Oak Park part of the county.
So that's the exact same thing that happened to me. And actually working with you and the guys in the South area was probably the best thing for me. And I don't remember how I got assigned. I was probably just told, okay, you're going to be working down here today. My first TO was Hugh McGraw. Okay. I don't think I've told this story before. And it took me a while to realize this is why it was happening. Hugh passed away in 1979 at the age of 36. Hugh was about 6'3" and about 240, 260 pounds. Big guy.
Big guy.
Dude had hands the size of catcher's mitts. And they called him Baby Huey because of Hugh McGraw. Well, you didn't say that to his face, for one. And the other thing was he wore gloves, black gloves, up to his wrist almost all the time. And a lot of people took that, interpreted that as he perceived himself as a badass. I discovered it was a while before I discovered this. I was best man at his wedding. I really enjoyed talking to the guy. We got along really well, and he became a friend and a mentor. And passed away, obviously, way too early. A typical day for him would be to work swings. We worked swings. You worked swings down south, and I worked with the guys down south. So you get through at 12:30, 1 o'clock, or perhaps later, depending on the calls that you had in the paper. So he'd get through at 1 o'clock, working swing shift down south, sleep for about 3 or 4 hours, get up at 5 a.m., and then do his second job. He was a pipe fitter and a welder.
Did not know that.
And he would weld and work. Polly became his, I think, second wife. And so he would work from about 6 a.m. to just before having to go to work at swing shift. Swing shift started at 3 p.m. For 4 days. We worked 4 10s. And so basically for 20 hours, 19 hours, 20 hours a day, he was working. Well, you didn't see his hands very much. If you ever did, you would have seen that they were terribly scarred. And he had the kind of hands from having worked in that kind of thing. His hands were in terrible shape. Yeah. They were cracked. And he never told me this, but I suspect that he wore gloves. And you tell me if I'm wrong about this. I don't know. I think he wore gloves because he was kind of embarrassed of his hands. Did he have a rep? Because I wouldn't know. I was just a reserve. Did he have a rep of being an ass kicker and a badass, and that's why people thought he wore gloves?
No, not really. Everybody knew he worked, I want to say 17, but he went from Rancho Marietta.
Right. He was in 18. It was all over.
And when he called for cover, his window would be down. He'd go on 100 miles an hour, and that's what we always knew.
Oh, God.
He was on his way because you could hear the wind and stuff going through, and he's trying to talk on the radio. It was a blast. But, no, he never really had a bad rap. We always knew he was coming, and he'd be there.
Because 18, for those people who don't know, is this... Well, now it's pretty well built up.
That's where Mitchell was killed out there.
Yes, exactly, where Jeff Mitchell was killed. It's kind of this no man's, or it was at the time, not a whole bunch of stuff was happening out there. So what he ended up doing was covering back and forth, covering people in Rancho, covering people south, covering people Rancho, covering people south. But I'll never forget this about Beat 18. And I never knew this existed, and maybe you do, maybe you didn't. There's a place out in 18 in the 70s. It was called Rawhide Ranch.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for those of you who don't know what Rawhide Ranch is or was, Rawhide Ranch was a nudist colony that was out, I don't know, somewhere way deep in wherever Beat 18 was. We would go out there, and he would get out of the car. Mr. Stupid here was just embarrassed as hell. Everybody knew him. Everybody would shake his hand. They were happy to see him. They'd give him a drink, a big Coke or something like that. Hugh never went anywhere without a Coke in his hand. He would drink Cokes from AM to PM. And I came to realize that, all these people out here that almost never got cop coverage loved to see him. Yeah. Now I'm going to also go someplace else that probably doesn't... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Our mechanic bought property out there. He worked on our helicopters. He was a civilian mechanic.
John Brones?
John Brones. Bought property right next door to Rawhide Ranch.
Really?
So every time we needed a maintenance, sometimes we had to land at his house, and he'd come out and he'd check the blades or whatever for us, and he'd sign on the book. We'd fly over Rawhide Ranch and land at his house. Of course, they started getting calls saying, this helicopter keeps coming out here. Well, it wasn't because of Rawhide Ranch. It's because our mechanic lived right next door. So,
just interesting times. I had the option. I worked south for a while as a reserve, and I worked north for a while as a reserve. I always enjoyed working south better, and the reason was it was a lot more active. There's a lot more stuff going on. And all the deputies down there, yourself included, were such a unified, cohesive group of people. The camaraderie was fabulous. It was unequaled. Yeah. And that was back in the time where you literally had to remember where everybody else was. Right. And then, we got the MCTs in the cars. We were one of the earliest departments to get any kind of computer-aided dispatch in our cars, and we got those in 70. That was because of Sheriff Lowe. And that was because of Sheriff Lowe. Sheriff Lowe,
his command did not want him to buy the helicopters or those computers. He fought like hell to keep those.
He put us smack dab in the 20th century. He modernized the department like no one else had. I was speaking to somebody that was in Georgia. I had him on the show about 3 months ago, a gentleman named Gary Bush, and we were talking about law enforcement suicides. And he said back then in Georgia, his department, before he retired, they didn't get anything in the automobile like computers or laptops or MDTs, MCTs until 10 years ago. Yeah. We got MDTs in... Well, hell, they were in some of our 75 automobiles, and then when we went to the Le Mans in 76 and 77, They were in the Le Mans, 76, 77, 75. So we had MCTs and computer-aided dispatch mobile terminals in the cars in 1975. Yeah. That's unheard of.
His son, Audie Lowe, is on Facebook a lot.
Yes.
He posts some of the old stuff, and Sheriff Lowe would take and have a prisoner. He'd take his wife along with him for a partner so she could hold the guns on the guys in the back seat. Audie has a lot of stuff. I wish he'd read a book, to tell you the truth.
Oh, he probably has. There's so much stuff that I did and I have done. I can't remember.
No.
My memory is so crappy. I have a chat room, and there are a lot of people in chat right now. By the way, welcome to Simone and the Alaskan Leslie. Welcome to Sergeant Booker and Jack Alexander. Jack Alexander in chat has a question, and if I could direct this at you, he says, are police pilots sworn officers?
95% yes.
Okay.
There are a few civilian pilots, but they figure that the civilian pilots they don't know enough about police work to know what's going on. All they know is how to fly the helicopter. And the real brains in this thing is the observer, because they're the one that tells the pilot where to go, what to do, and all this. But a pilot just flies it. But you still have to know what's going on the ground to put the observer in a position to do his job. So that's why it's better off to have a sworn officer as a pilot.
And Larry Laird, this is probably a perfect time to transition this way. Okay, you're in patrol. I worked with you, had a great time. A lot of other people, Eddie Denton, Jimmy Basden, Larry James, Ziff Van Kirk, a cast of thousands, had a great time. And then you went to Aero. And I'm assuming that you went to Aero because you were looking, as opposed to Vietnam, you perceived that you had the opportunity to be a pilot?
No, not necessarily. I just love flying, especially helicopters, because you're right on the ground. I mean, we flew at 500 feet. The new guys out there now, I think they fly a lot higher. They don't go as fast as we did, but that's another story. I just wanted to be an observer. And I had a pilot named Al David, and he retired probably about 10 years after I'd been there. The first 10 or 15 years, we didn't have any turnover rate. No pilots came in, no observers left, so we were all one whole crew. And him and I made the first off-site landing back in the old days in the 70s. Used to have these huge parties. Well, CHP waded in on one out by Antelope, and they had arrested a couple people, and they had them in custody, and the people were trying to take the CHP, trying to take the guys away from CHP out of custody.
Right.
I told Al, I said, we got to land this thing. And he said, where? And I said, right there in the middle of that street. He's the first one that did an off-site landing with a helicopter. And I come out of there, I have my helmet on, I have my flashlight, I'm running towards these guys. Well, when they saw the helicopter coming, they all split like little mice. I mean, they went every direction. And CHP was so happy to see us. I mean, that guy, he thanked us a million times every time he'd say, well, I'll go buy you guys dinner.
When you first flew, now, you started as an observer,
right,
but then got the opportunity to become a pilot?
Right. When they first started, the observers didn't have any idea of how to fly the thing.
Okay.
It was never given. Finally, we talked to them and say, hey, you got to give us enough. If something happens to the pilot, he gets shot or has a heart attack, we got to be able to land this thing. So they gave us enough hours to be able to land it, take off and land.
Okay.
And then there started being some turnover. Mike Isaac, who was one of the original pilots, he just died recently of cancer, lives down in Arizona. He was my pilot for a long time. Talk about a crazy pilot. This guy could fly anything. If you could get it started, he'd fly it. And that's how he learned. But he took lessons and got his license. But he would go out, we'd be taking off in this 300, and the tower's right out the end of our hangar doors there. He'd go out and he'd do a corkscrew up the tower and shining the light into the tower and then sat there and look at them while they're looking at him. I mean, I got another story about that guy. You remember the old drive-in between Davis and Sacramento that was the adult?
Oh,
drive-in?
Right. Yes.
We'd gone on a pursuit down I-5, and we'd gone down Dixon, and we were on the way back. So Mike decides he's going to go watch the movie. It's raining like hell. I mean, we sat out there probably for 10 minutes, and all I ever saw was this guy sucking toes on this girl. And I couldn't believe it. I said, you bring me to an adult theater, and this is what we see? I always brought that up when I see him.
When you first started flying, now, there was some movement. You wanted to become a pilot, so they got you into a local flight school?
No, that was taught right out there. Mike Smith taught us.
Okay, so the instructor pilot was one of the people that was already there in the
right.
in the detail.
Mike Smith.
Okay,
had a CFI.
And so the first aircraft that you flew was the Hughes 300.
Right.
Okay, so for people who don't know, let me change cameras here. Here's a picture of a Hughes 300. So it kind of looks like a light bulb with a boom in the back.
And a Volkswagen engine.
And it had a little teeny engine, teeny in terms of aviation. And I learned something very intriguing with this. I don't remember who said this to me. It wasn't you. It might have been Gordy Robinson. Told me a couple of stories about that. And I remembered this, and I wrote this for the story, The Bear in the Air, for the Deputy magazine when that came out. I wrote a big, long article about the aero detail. And I discovered it's a Lycoming engine. It's an opposed 4-cylinder engine. That's the only thing that makes that thing go, is an air, naturally aspirated, 4-cylinder Lycoming engine, 460 cubic inches. And the transmission consists of belts, like the belts that you'd have in your car.
On your radiator.
So, and it had a ton of them. It had about 15 belts. So if it threw 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever, you still had some belts in reserve, which I don't know why, but I found that a little disconcerting, that the transmission in this entire helicopter holding me up along with this other guy is just these belts. And he told me a story of another guy that was sitting in that seat that he'd taken for a ride, who was so scared of being in that thing that he gripped the bottom cushion of the helicopter. And at the end of the ride, he sat down and he told the guy, I really don't know why you're hanging onto that seat, because that seat comes off right like this. And he goes, it comes right off like Velcro.
It was Velcroed in there.
Yeah, and so the guy kind of blanched a little bit. So in the 300, you flew the 300, and then we transitioned over to the Hughes 500, which was, comparatively speaking, like a race car, I would guess. So obviously you flew the 500 and the 300. What were the biggest differences? Well,
size and speed.
Okay. All right, because the Hughes had a turbine, right? A jet engine?
Right, it had a jet engine, and it would go, well, stripped down, a Hughes 500 will probably do about 150 miles an hour. But with all the radios and equipment and lights and stuff that we had on it, and they kept adding stuff, and then they got the FLIR, then they got this and that, so we could probably get 120 out of it. The Hughes 300, you're lucky on a hot day if you could do 80 miles an hour. And I'm sitting over in the observer seat, Al Dave and my pilot sitting over, just pulling the guts out to go to this hot call we're going to, and I'm sitting over, I'm bouncing up and down. And he's saying, God damn it. He says, sit still. And I've got my foot out the door. I'm just sort of like pedaling this along. I just couldn't contain myself. I wanted to get there.
Quicker.
And to fly this 300, nowadays they have, when you start the engine up, it's all automatic. You just pull the collective, and the governor already picks the RPM and stuff for you. Back when we had it, you were always chasing the RPM with the throttle. And the mechanic wouldn't put in an automatic for us. So if you could fly a 300, you could fly anything because you're always chasing your RPM. Every time you change the setting, you had to change your RPM.
Because the other thing that the book that's right there, and by the way, folks, if you have any interest in helicopters, Vietnam, flying, the Huey, go get Chicken Hawk by Robert Mason. What a book. It tells him, if you want to learn about, he tells you how he learned to fly.
Yeah.
And that the other thing a lot of people I don't think realize is that as a helicopter pilot, every appendage you have is at work all the time. Your 2 feet are on the pedals. Your right hand is on the cyclic. Your left hand is on the collective. In those helicopters, and especially the Huey also, as you pull up the collective, which moves you up into the air, it changes the angle of attack on the rotor blade. You also have to add throttle. If you don't add throttle, you're not going anywhere. So the 500s had some of that was automatic. If you pulled some pitch, then it would just automatically roll open the throttle for you.
You just put the throttle, full throttle, and you lock it. And then you just change the pitch on the blades and then the attitude that you're going to fly it at.
See, I absolutely loved flying in helicopters. It scared some people poopless. Okay. All right, I wasn't going to ask this, but I will anyway. I'm sure you had to take some people on the 300 or the 500, guests or VIPs or something like that, on tours or trips. Did you have anybody that you took on tour that just they couldn't wait to get out once you got back down?
No, we took board of supervisors, Sandy Smalley, and back then it was her, and several others. I don't know of anybody that didn't like it. I mean, they're amazed at what we could see. Of course, we didn't do any full, throttles or anything on them. We made nice, easy turns.
Right.
Showed them their house. Showed them Lake Folsom and all this, and prison, and they enjoyed it. And they said, "Well, we can't believe what you can see from up here. You can even tell what color tennis shoes they're wearing." And you can.
For those people who are on video right now, I'm showing you. This is a Hughes 500, so you could see the difference between the Hughes 300 and the Hughes 500. And the Hughes 500 actually, I'm going to get the terminology wrong, I think. They were in Vietnam. Weren't they called Little Birds or something like that?
That's the one we had is a D model. The one we had in Vietnam was a C model. And the only difference was the one in Vietnam was 4-bladed on the top. The ones we had here are 5-bladed. And the tail was a little bit different over in Vietnam.
Okay.
But basically, yeah, they're called Little Birds. And FBI still uses them. CIA, they still have them.
It's funny because Hughes, I went to go look for the Hughes 300, and now the Hughes 300 is called Schweitzer. And they manufacture that. And then Hughes, I think, McDonnell Douglas,
which
purchased the
Boeing
500.
owns them now.
Yeah, many.
I would love to fly an Apache. I would do anything to get in an Apache. I think those are the neatest things.
Did you ever have the opportunity to fly in one, not fly one,
No,
maybe, but fly in one?
That's what I'm saying. If I could just get a ride in one, I'd love it. When the war broke out after the towers, Blackwater, who was a private industry,
right,
was hiring, and I tried to get back in and said, "No, you're too old." I said, "Well, I'm already trained. You don't need these guys." I even called the Army. I said, "I've got so many hours." I said, "Just transition me for about 20 hours, and I can take over." I said, "You don't need to put a young kid in there." I said, "I can do it." "Nah, you're too old." So I gave up. But I would have done anything.
when we got to take a break. This will be our last break. And when we come back, I want to ask Larry Laird about flying helicopters in general, and also when the last time he flew a helicopter. And then very briefly before we go, I want to ask Larry some thoughts about law enforcement in general. We'll be right back after this.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Southern Sense is conservative talk with Annie, the radio chick you bellows as host, and C.S. Bennett co-host. Informative, fun, irreverent, and politically incorrect. You never know where they'll go, but you'll love the journey. Annie is a top conservative host on Top Talk Radio and features some of the finest guests packed with important politicians and newsmakers. Listen every Friday, 3 to 6 p.m. Eastern, noon to 3 Pacific, on the SHR Media Network. Remember, Southern Sense is common sense.
Hey, are you guys listening? This is Shannon from Right Wave with Shannon and Mike in the AM on SHR Media. I know you've been wondering where we are and what's been going on. Well, folks, that's right, we're back. So please, join us 7 to 9 a.m. Monday through Thursday on SHR Media, on Spreaker, iHeartRadio, and Spotify, and Facebook Live at 11 a.m. on Right Way with Shannon and Mike in the AM at Facebook. You don't want to miss a minute. We've got lots of guests, lots of segments, and lots of interesting things. And let's face it, there's nowhere for you to go, so you might as well tune in. Again, Right Way with Shannon and Mike in the AM. We're back live on the air on SHR Media, 7 to 9 a.m. Monday through Thursday, audio and Facebook Live, audio and video. Yes, we are going to do video. Facebook Live, Right Way with Shannon and Mike in the AM. Hope to see you soon.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, thanks for being with me tonight. My guest for the entire show has been Larry Laird. He and I were partners when he was a full-time deputy, and I was a reserve deputy sheriff down in the South Sacramento area. We talked about that. We talked about him having worked as a crew chief in Vietnam, having come back and then learned how to fly Hughes 300 helicopters for the Sacramento Sheriff's Department, and also the Hughes 500 for the Sacramento Sheriff's Department. So, Larry Laird, did you you retired out of the aero detail, didn't you, or did you?
No, I got a medical retirement because of lower back problems.
Okay, but the last assignment that you had was the aero detail?
Yes, I spent 17 and a half years there.
Okay. Wow, I didn't realize that you were flying that long.
Yeah. I have almost 10,000 hours.
Were you there when Ken Wade was there?
Yes.
Ken Wade was my beat partner in District 4. He was 44 David and I was 48 David. And he had been in Aero for a while and then left Aero. And he told me something that I thought, okay, I can see this, I can understand this, and then I want to ask if this applied to you. He said he left Aero because he also flew for the Army, he flew for the military, came here, became a deputy, and then decided he wanted to fly again. Great, flew helicopters. He says, I got out of it because I could hear footsteps. And he said, I just felt that after a while, I was pushing the envelope, and I just got this funny feeling that if I kept staying there, something was going to catch up to me.
You need to leave.
I just figured, you know what? I think it's time to leave. Did you ever feel anything like that?
No. When I was having my back problems, my feet were going numb. And on the rudder pedals, what you can pick up is vibrations from the helicopter, from the tail rotor and the engine, because that's high frequency.
Mm-hmm.
And my feet were going numb and I couldn't feel it. And the last time I flew was in October of 93. And I quit. I says, I got to go to the doctor and have this checked out. And that's when they did my first operation.
Okay. And then you retired in 96.
I retired in 95.
Oh, 95.
Yeah.
Okay. It was great to have you here tonight. I really appreciate the time that you took. We sent some correspondence back and forth, and I really appreciate your sharing your time with everyone here. I have to tell you this. I've been a ton of places in law enforcement, and I never told you guys this because at the time I was kind of embarrassed. I worked for the feds before I came full-time to the Sacramento Sheriff's Department. I worked for the FBI for a while, and then I worked for the U.S. Marshal for a while. And I determined rather rapidly, after sucking up all the money that they spent on me on Quantico, that the federal law enforcement venue wasn't for me. I came back, got picked up full-time. Well, I went to another sheriff's department, got involved in a critical incident where a guy shot at me and I shot at him and ended up killing him. Thank God the internet is not around to immure that, because I keep looking to see if it's there just because, and it's not. So, woohoo, I'm still lucking out. And I've been everywhere on the department. I've been on the federal side. I've been on the state and the county side. I've been in 3 World's Fairs and a goat fuck. And I have to tell you that some of the most fun times, the best times that I look back on now in retrospect, I had a great time in patrol and lots of other things. Don't get me wrong, when I was a full-time guy, some of the best times I ever had in law enforcement was when I was working in the South area with you and all the other guys, because everyone worked so well. It's hard to quantify this stuff. Everyone worked so well. I wasn't one of the guys per se. A lot of full-time deputy sheriffs didn't want to have a damn thing to do with reserve deputies. And to a man, you and everybody else treated me very well. And it's that experience, working with such a close and insular bunch of people, that's why that sticks in my brain as being one of the greatest times. Yeah, okay. It's probably one of the greatest times I've ever had in law enforcement. I've never really told anybody this. And you were part of it.
Good. I'm glad we taught you something.
And I'd say you did. Because it was after that I went for another department, got into all that stupid crap down there. After that, with this other department, do you remember Jack Greenlaw?
Yes.
He was a recruiting guy. I was sure the county was not going to take me back, because I thought, I'm dead meat.
Yeah.
I'm already marked on this. And Jack put in a good word for me. The department treated me very well. The only thing they said was, you've been through the Reserve Academy, you've been through this other federal crap, and you had to go through a couple of courses down in this coastal county. We're still going to put you back through an entire new academy again in 1980. But we'll pick you up. And I said, sold.
Mm-hmm.
Sold. Easiest academy I ever took. It was the Live-In Academy, the Select Academy at CHP.
Yeah.
Had a grand time. And I don't know if they thought that it was punishment or they were trying to cover their butts or whatever it was, but I loved it.
Yeah.
I would no longer work for law enforcement now than I would considering taking a ball-peen hammer to the top of my head. What you and I had the luck and ability to experience then is something I don't think any law enforcement officer will have the luxury of experiencing now. I hear of guys being in patrol who after, I don't know, a year or so, they're done. They're done. They want to go someplace else.
It's not the same.
And I get it in today's environment. So you probably have grandkids. Would you counsel anybody that you knew to get into law enforcement these days?
Not now. One of my sons has a law degree from Davis, and he worked for the DA's office for 11 years. He's in private practice now. And that's about as close as they come. None of my kids wanted to fly. They still don't want to fly. None of my kids want to be a police officer. They don't understand it, and that's fine. I've got one who's an assistant head coach for basketball for Sac State. He's back in Boise now at the playoffs with his team. He loves what he does, and like you said, if you can't play, you teach. And he was a good player. He won was on the team at Davis when they won the national championship for Division II. So he's been through all that. And now, like I said, he's the assistant head coach at Sac State, and he loves it. He's the recruiter. So he gets to go out and pick the kids that come. But I would discourage any of them going into law enforcement the way things are nowadays. No way in hell would I even step back in it.
No.
Not even in flying a helicopter when you're away from it. I still couldn't put up with it.
I think you and I were of a generation that we were lucky to have experienced this department,
right,
the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department, at its ultimate, at its best, at its strongest, at its most unified and cohesive. And we experienced law enforcement when you were tasked to do a job and you were given the discretion to actually do it.
Do it. Yep. You were given your free reign. Do the job. If you don't want help, call me. Other than what, we leave you alone. You know, you do your paperwork, you do your whatever it is you need to do, and we had fun. And we did a lot of things that these kids nowadays can't even think about doing.
No.
And we got away with it.
And I don't even think it's a matter of getting away. I think it's a matter of having. We didn't have a fraction of the tools, the stuff to do things that folks have now. So we had not much backup, and we had to take care of problems, and we had to take care of each other because there was nobody out here to do it. It was just us to be able to do it. So I think, frankly, in terms of law enforcement, I lucked out.
Yeah, we both did. I mean, I can still hear Hugh McGraw coming from Rancho Meridio with that window down.
Yep.
I'm on my way. He was a great guy.
We lucked out. I think we really lucked out. Because you mentioned fun. And with any job, we're going to wrap this up, folks. With any job, why would you do it if you don't have fun?
Right.
And if there's something that I don't hear associated with law enforcement anymore, and I don't know that many people that are still working, but I know some recent retirees, and the one word used with their recent experiences is not fun.
No.
And if you can't have fun, why are you there?
Right.
I used to have so much fun in law enforcement, in patrol, just to mention one, that on my Friday, I would shag late calls just because I didn't feel like going in, because I was having so much damn fun.
It was.
And that's how I want to remember law enforcement.
Good.
That's how I want to remember it. Larry, thank you so kindly for being here tonight.
I love being here.
I greatly appreciate it.
Told a few war stories that I normally don't tell.
Yeah, and I appreciate that.
But like you said, it was a fun time, and I wouldn't do what these kids are doing nowadays because it's not the same.
No, it just isn't. You and I both know that things change. We always have to change. People hate change, but either you change or change steamrollers you.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. So thanks for being here, folks. I will be here this Thursday night. We'll actually get into some politics and whatnot. Larry Laird, thank you for being here tonight. And we'll leave on this, as I customarily do. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, thanks for listening to the Bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon radio show, live and direct right here on the SHR Media Network. If you want to contact me, you can find me on Twitter at bzep at bzep and on my blog at bloviatingzeppelin.net. Promotional consideration is by the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works and also by Pratt & Whitney Engines Thrust You Can Trust. And tiaras are by My Little Pony. Thanks also to my personal KC-135 Kettle One refueling team with whom I shall be consorting in less than an hour. Thanks to everybody for listening here. Thanks for being in Facebook chat. Thanks for being in SHR Media chat. And thanks for listening in podcast. I get a lot of people who listen in podcast. I appreciate each and every person who does that, who takes the time to do that, especially this late night show. So, folks, I'll see you Thursday night. Everybody, God bless, take care, and be safe.
Everybody quiet down now and get some sleep.
Night, everybody.
Good night, Mama. Good night, Ben.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, Mama. Good night, Daddy.
Good night, children.
Good night, Daddy. Good night, Elizabeth.
Good night, John Boy. Good night, Jim Bob. Good night, Jim Bob.
Good night, Jim Bob.
What's going on? I was asleep. What's everybody doing?
Good night.
Good night, Jim Bob. Go to sleep.
Good night, and good luck.